a large part about business is really knowing the details and paying attention to the details to make certain you're successful. But let's look on the aspect of business and wealth building. When we talk about business, we're talking about something that you're filling a need in the market, whether it's a service or a product. And if you recall, the reality of an American economy is that 80% of the businesses here in the United States are service oriented and only 20% are manufacturing. So with that, the world of the entrepreneur really has choices to make. And there's a big push currently, and we'll see what happens over the next several years, of trying to increase the overall manufacturing capacity of the United States, which is a great opportunity for a person we call the entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs, they're the ones that risk the time and money to start and manage a business. So some of the terminology that we're going to cover, and you have to know these to talk the language of business. So make certain you have something active to write these down. Revenue is all the money that your company has coming in the front door. That's called revenue. And then from that, you take the expenses. And after you take the expenses from the revenue, you have hopefully a profit, which is money that you make, or you have a loss. Revenue is all the money that comes in, and then profit or loss is what you're left with after you subtract all the expenses. In theory, if life is good, the more risk you take, the more profit you make. Now, sometimes it's really kind of dumb in the aspect of I'm going to go out and I'm going to do something illegal, make a lot of money. Well, yeah, except you get to spend the money in prison with the rest of your life, which is not a really smart choice to make. So that's not a risk you should be taking. But if you're out in the world trying to sit down and make a living as an entrepreneur, the higher the risk, hopefully the higher the probability of profit, but also the higher risk, probably the higher the potential chance is failure. So really, if you're going to go into the world of business, you have to weigh the aspect of how much risk can I tolerate, which is a big deal. Not all enterprises make the same amount of profit. You'll see the food industry doesn't come close to making the profitability in fast food that you'd expect it to make. So that being said, we'll study that later on. We'll look at some other businesses, and sometimes manufacturing doesn't work at all. It just depends where you're at. And then sometimes you're wildly successful. Once upon a time, you go back and Jeff Bezos, in an interview in 2008, he got there and he says, the allegory of standing at home plate with all the bases loaded and with one swing of the bat in the world of business, you score a grand slam home run and score 4 runs. He says that simply isn't true. Sometimes you take that swing of the bat and you score 1,000 runs. Well, he's absolutely right. If you look at the fabulous success of Amazon, started at just less than 3 decades, and it dominates the world in some of the top 5 businesses worldwide. Pretty good. He took a risk at the beginning of it, and look how fabulous it happened. So sometimes it's not just a limited success, it can be a spectacular success in the process. It just depends where you're at. Not all enterprises make the same amount of profit. Not all industries provide the opportunity to make massive profit like that. So risk and reward, by the time you're all done, boom, you have something really good. And sometimes you enter a market and you're over here, you're thinking you're entering this market, and your product takes a different twist to it. And all of a sudden, you have an example over here. Somebody learned an old invention called Scrub Daddy. And by the time it was done, it transformed from the original purpose into something much more rewarding for the consumer and the producer of it at the same time. Risk reward, sometimes you go into business and you end up being highly successful in a different field than you ever expected. You may go into business and I'm going to have a tire store and sell tires. Ends up that you end up having so much more success selling the wheels on the tires because you customize wheels, that you stop selling the tires and just sell the wheels because you make more money and have a very specific clientele. It just depends the business that you enter. A couple other things out there. One thing I want you to really pay attention to, and I realize we're going to talk about the altruism of climate change and the greening of America. Make certain that we too can have sustainable products. I'm going to give you a clue. This is a business class. It's about capitalism. It's about business. It's about making money. Here's the reality of it. If you go back a little bit in history, not that far back, we have a thing called the Paris Accord. At the Paris Accord, all these politicians, they all lined up and he says, we're going to spend $131 trillion by 2050 to change planet Earth. Now, listen, if you believe everything a politician says, let me know, and I'll sell you some fabulous desert land in the middle of Florida. Yeah, right. Don't believe everything they say, but I want you to listen to this. Even if they do half of what they said, you're looking at a massive business opportunity in the world of sustainability, of greening the earth, of climate change. You too can make money while you're saving the world. Pretty good gig in the process over there. You can sit down there and satisfy all your desire to help make the planet a better place and make a profit at the same time. Pay attention to that because that's called business and looking for opportunity. And the opportunity would be met with a lot of positive public following. That being said, Coca-Cola, they, believe it or not, we're going back to a company that's more than 100 years old that started out selling a liquid that had cocaine in it. Yes, that really did have cocaine in it. That's why those senior citizens talk about when I was a kid, I had to walk uphill to school for 2 miles and walk uphill on the way back too. Well, that's because they had all that cocaine in their system. Yes, they actually did have it. They changed the formula about 15 years after they started, and they took all the narcotics out. They just inserted a whole bunch of caffeine in the process over here. That we've changed a lot in society. We've moved away from the soda aspect of it. We changed from soda, and now Coca-Cola, they sell water, they sell juices, they sell a whole series of things because they're going way past the original scope of where they were as an entrepreneurial company. They started over here in an industry that sold nothing but liquid that had a little bit of cocaine in the process over here, and they evolved into soda. Then it depends where you're at. You'll hear it called soda pop, you'll hear it called pop, you'll hear it called Coke in the process. We go into deep south, all soda in the deep south is often referred to as Coke. I want an orange Coke. Coca-Cola doesn't make orange. Okay, but that orange drink, well, that's called Fanta. Anyway, that's a different thing in a geography. Coca-Cola now has evolved past the soda into multiple different other fields as well. You'll see a lot of businesses will evolve with time as they go through. In the 1800s, we really had an agricultural industry that led economic development. And then eventually, believe it or not, the agricultural industry really was the beginning of technology. You would never view that as a farm leading technology, but yes, they had the harvester, they had the cotton gin, and then those things made farming more successful. And then it grew larger and larger in the process. And then farming evolved really into a technology industry, and that was really the driver between the industrialization of the United States and a large part of the world as well. That technology improved productivity and fewer workers needed. Factories spawned to produce the equipment. And then if you go back and look at it, we'll talk a little bit about Henry Ford, who really wasn't a nice person, in my opinion, if you read the history books, except he helped spawn the middle class in the United States. What's fascinating as we go through this course, you'll see a couple things. You'll see some countries that were just a couple decades ago third world nations now growing a middle class in the process and changing economically in their nation, as well as changing the economy of planet Earth. So technology, agriculture, we don't view it as a high-tech industry, except now they're using drones to sit down and deal with an awful lot of work. Tractors often are driven on autopilot, and the only time a farmer that's sitting in the cab of the tractor engages, they only engage when the tractor has to turn around and go back the other direction. The pitch of the actual blade, the pitch of everything that's involved in that tractor are really guided by satellites in the process, and also an AI that drives it in the process. We'll see really driverless tractors in fields on a regular basis now. They're in experimental stage at the time of this recording. We'll see more of that happening, as well as drones involved in the process. We really have a lot of progress also in the service industries. We changed from a really manufacturing dominant economy in the 1980s into really a service sector economy because the cost of producing goods in the United States was so high. A lot of large corporations moved their products from here over to Mexico. They moved it to South America. They moved it to really Asia, especially China. And now you'll see a lot of different textile companies making clothing in Bangladesh, Vietnam, Cambodia, and so on. So you'll see a lot of heavy manufacturers move, and we really have become a service sector. Make certain you pay attention to those numbers because that could be on a test. Let's look on the information age. We really were in the information age, but we really have evolved. When we hit chapter 14, we talk about marketing. We'll talk about but the different ages because we really have left the information age in the past now. We're looking into biotechnology age based upon that as well. You have to know the details. The more that you have risk, you should have more profit. Make sure you know what revenue is, all the money coming in, and that expenses are the cost of producing that revenue. And by the time you take the revenue minus expenses, you'll have a profit or a loss in the process. Make sure you know the definition of an entrepreneur and pay attention to this green environment. There's a huge amount of opportunity there. And so pay attention if you're thinking about starting the business. There's a lot of financial opportunities out there, but there is if you open up your mind and find a way to solve a problem or a problem that nobody even knows exists. Know the details in the world of business. Take care.